Hi, this is Stu Stover again. Today's episode, I wanted to get into sort of the quality movement that has showed up. So part of the dilemma here with the quality movement is this is all going back to the 80s. Okay, why do we go back to the 1980s? That's 45 years ago. 40, 45, whatever. Long time ago. But in the 1980s, across America, quality had just fallen off the table. For a whole host of reasons, that factors came together, that companies were producing crap, selling it. But you know, the flip side of that is 1980s is when the Japanese really invaded our marketplace with cars, electronics, and you name it. And then of course Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, other countries also joined in to provide quality products for the American market. And you watched the demise of General Motors dropping off the table in terms of their market share, in terms of all sorts of factors, plants closing all over the place. And so quality was a huge issue, guys. Huge. So what you had is what I would describe as competing gurus. So people out there who had their particular version of how to fix America's problem. Now, some of this is very relevant today because, you've got a President Trump who's bound and determined that other countries have taken advantage of us. The short answer is we did it in many ways to ourselves, and because of management philosophy and just the focus of business was not on customer, not on quality. It was focused more on value to Wall Street, or who knows what all issues were going on in that process, treating workers like they were simply cogs in a wheel and completely inconsequential and all sorts of stuff. You also had the rise of technology that showed up in that area that eliminated the need for many employees, as if, again, in today's terms, we frame that as the foreigners, the Japanese, the Chinese, the whoever did that to us. And the answer is no. It was just new technology that made so many people obsolete. Didn't need them anymore to produce the goods. So Dr. Deming was probably the first and most powerful of the gurus. So Deming cut his teeth actually in World War II. And so you think about the task here. In World War II, with the kind of technology we had, no computers, he had to get guns, ammunition, everything else halfway around the world each way. Because it doesn't do much good if you got your gun, you don't have ammunition, or you don't have gas for the tanks, and you go bang, bang. That's probably not going to be very effective. He was really good at creating systems to facilitate the necessary goods going around the world so we could keep the war machine going. Well, at the end of World War II, he saw an opportunity that America could implement his quality tools. And you should look them up because they're interesting as he talks about this stuff. But America could implement this stuff, and we could have higher quality, lower price, better goods, and America would be far better off. American industry, particularly automobile industry, blew him off. Well, they blew him off because they couldn't meet demand. All this pent-up demand from the World War II era, and then before that, Great Depression, people wanted to buy stuff. And so did they really care about quality? No. They just wanted to get stuff out the door, get it in people's hands, call it good. So they blew him off. He went to Japan, and he helped Japan build high-quality companies that produce high-quality products with his methodology. And those of you who are interested in this stuff should look at what the Japanese built for a quality philosophy. Now, some of it seems a little silly to me. The 5S has some good things, bad things. But some of the other tools that the Japanese used were great. Well, eventually, 1980s, America realized they were in trouble. And so they brought him back from Japan. Ford in particular adopted him as their company guru. And they ran all of their management through Deming training so that they could produce a higher quality car. Okay. And so in general, and this is far too simplistic, guys, but it was about continuous improvement. Number one, continuous improvement basically meant we want to make things a little bit better every day. And so not the massive kinds of changes, but just a little bit, and a little bit every day or every week or every month, and pretty soon you've got some pretty substantial change that's going to happen across the organization. Well, the only way you could do that is you had to break the functionalness of the old organization where everybody was stayed in their little box and did their part, and the stuff comes down the assembling line, you do your part. You're disconnected from customer, you're disconnected from even the people around you. And he said you can't do that. You got to be team focused, you got to be process focused as opposed to just function focused. And so he was drastically trying to change the management culture of big business in America. And then, of course, understanding the system. And so for a while there was even talk that what you and I would do is a car dealership would not have cars sitting on the lot. You wouldn't go there and look at them and choose this blue one over here that you want or whatever. The idea is you'd go in and you'd choose what car you wanted and the accessory package that you wanted. That order would get sent in, and in 2 weeks it'd be delivered to you. Your car was built in the plant, sent to you. Okay. And what that was designed to do was focus again on the customer, which had been completely lopped out of the system in the old days. But it also meant that the people who were building the car were building it for a customer. Is that a good thing? Yeah, you get a sense of pride and ownership and accomplishment, all the other good things that happen when you do that kind of stuff. Obviously, we don't do that anymore because for the most part, everybody wants the same accessories. So, you just build them, but you still want to try and maintain some connection back to the customer. And so that was a particular approach that he did. And what you saw with gurus, you had a whole bunch. There was a Israeli named Goldratt who focused on bottlenecks that were in the system, that everything was focused on reducing bottlenecks. You had other folks who focused on collecting astonishing quantities of data that talked about what your quality levels were, which was statistical process control, which eventually morphed into some other approaches that showed out. Let me get rid of that for a second, because that's just a very, very quick look at what Deming was trying to do. He had his 14 points, he had just books, he had all sorts of stuff. The other big one in my mind was Mike Hammer. Mike Hammer came out of computer science. I'm not quite sure how that worked for him, but he said, if your organization is stable enough, good enough, that minor little improvements are going to be all you need, then by all means have at it. But he says if your organization is in trouble, we got to blow the organization apart, recreate it in ways that are more effective. Okay, so this was incremental, this was dramatic kinds of stuff. And so if we were talking politics right now, okay, Biden's approach is we fix the government a little bit at a time and we make it a little bit better, and lots of things we make a little bit better. Trump and particularly Elon have showed up and they've said blow it apart. It's no longer working. It's not what we want. Okay, and there's arguments to be made on both sides, although I like some of the stuff Hammer did, but anyway. So let's talk about what he's talking about. So number one is technology. So what happens, and let me give you a very old example of this. But back in the day, managers all had secretaries. And secretaries sat there at their typewriters and typed the stuff the boss gave them. Or they had dictaphones so that they could listen and then type it up and then send it and retype, And so you needed a secretary to do all the scut work, grunt work, whatever you want to call it, to allow the manager to be able to do managerial stuff, whatever that meant. Well, what happened is personal computers showed up. Personal computers meant that what do we need a secretary for if the manager can actually do that quicker or easier than writing it down, sending it to the secretary. Anyway, but new technology showed up not only for managers, but across the organization in terms of being able to deliver higher value, lower costs. We got all these people, bloated bureaucracies that, were built on the old system of, very, very steep pyramids in the organization with lots and lots of levels of middle management. And what did most of those middle management positions do? Well, it's hard to tell. But in classic stuff, they were channels. So they channeled information up the organization, obviously manipulated as they went, and then as decisions were made at the top, they funneled it back down the organization. With personal computers, do you really need all of that? And the answer is probably not. And so what Hammer was saying is that we've got to have organizations that are reflective of the kind of technology that we have available. He was very focused on customer. And so he said, if you in your job are not adding value to the customer, what are you doing there? Well, you had people across the organization that were doing itty-bitty little bureaucratic roles, had nothing to do with the customer. Well, to be fair, there are jobs that are non-value adding, but necessary. So human resources, for example, does the customer care about human resources? Of course not. Does a customer care about what the employee handbook says? Of course not. And yet, if you're going to have an organization, don't you have to have human resources? Don't you have to have, some of the things that human resources should be doing? And so this focus on customer and focus on value added was a huge addition to not only literature, but how organizations function. And so what you had was incremental and massive change in the organization. Most organizations, do they handle change well? No. When it's massive change, how well do they handle it? Who knows? In most cases, badly. And I would argue some of the political stuff has been done very badly, not focused on customer, not focused on what the organization is supposed to provide value for. And so, you get all the dilemmas of Elon's approach, and as best I can tell, Elon doesn't really care about customer service, so you get rid of all those positions. Aren't there reasons we have customer service and help desks and helplines and all the other stuff? Because sometimes you can't figure it out when you're on the outside and figure out how to access into the system. So the answer is there's a lot more to Hammer. And if any of you are interested, I'm happy to talk some more about Hammer. But what we've got today is we seem to have gravitated back to a more bureaucratic style of organization, back to a version of Frederick Taylor's scientific management. And yet we have all this technology, we reduce the number of people. I mean, look at a McDonald's, for example. In the old days, you'd have 3 times the employees in a McDonald's that they do today. Well, what's the difference? You and I go to the kiosk, we order our food, we pay with our credit card, so you don't need somebody at the front desk. You've got all this technology in the back that makes all this stuff, and so you just don't need as many people So it creates all sorts of dilemmas, both good and bad, for organizations as they sort this out. So this stuff is hardly done. Hammer was very much the guru when organizations got in trouble, had to downsize, had to figure out how to reposition the organization in some substantial way. Deming was saying, yeah, you got to do some of that stuff too, but the point is, deliver on a more incremental approach to that. Now, you might wonder, which side do I land on? There's a lot of pluses to Deming. And using his methodology, some of the Japanese theories, management theories, other stuff today. So yeah, I like some of Deming stuff. Are there times when Hammer stuff is appropriate? Yeah, you get in a crisis, I'm sorry. You're not going to solve the problem by using Deming. You got to do something far more dramatic. And so my notion here is that you need both tools in your toolkit. You need to understand how to use the Japanese management stuff in positive ways and incremental change, all that stuff. But you also have to have the ability to do some of this stuff sometimes when the world changes in dramatic ways. So you're going to spend a lot more time on some of these issues in your class, but the idea is to understand the history of this a bit, understand how we got to where we are, and some of the silly political rhetoric we're hearing right now is just flat out Looney Tunes in terms of how history actually worked. So hopefully this was helpful, and we can make more sense of these things as you move into organizations down the road. So thank you very much.